Just saying. Watch out for me.
I really don't want to pay attention. You know how extroverted I am. I don't know what else.
Okay, I have 12:28, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is a workshop on Myers-Briggs negotiation. It's kind of a long workshop. It's more like 45 minutes. Compressed into 30 because that's how much time we have. But I do have, I'll show you at the end, there's a research guide with more information on it, and I'll direct you to that at the end. And also, this workshop is already saved and put up on, on that research guide. So you can get to this workshop and look at it later on. If I went over things quickly and you weren't quite sure you got it all, that's okay. I wouldn't worry as I'm presenting about getting every detail. Try to go for the big picture and get the details later on. On that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Psychology of negotiation is based on Myers-Briggs, which I'm going to go through and kind of describe what Myers-Briggs is. It is sometimes called Myers-Briggs type indicator. It's a psychological preference that all of us have to some extent or the other. It does have to do with how we perceive the world and how we're different from each other. We perceive things differently sometimes. We communicate some things differently. We make decisions differently. There are several places where you can go online and take the Myers-Briggs test. And the first two on this page are for free. They're scaled down versions of the full Myers-Briggs test. But this is fairly new. It used to be that you had to go to a testing center and pay a good bit of money to take the full Myers-Briggs. But now you can take the full test online for $49.95 and they'll give you your results. But these first two are not bad, and you can take them online for free. The Myers-Briggs has four dichotomies. These are four personality temperaments, and they describe them as extroversion, introversion. You're either extroverted or you're introverted. Some people are close to the middle, but we usually bias one way or the other. And a lot of people are very extroverted, and some people are very introverted. Sensing intuitive is another dichotomy. Thinking, feeling, and judging, perceiving. And they use abbreviations on this. E for extroversion, I for introversion. So they're fairly, logical in that sense. The one that's a little different is intuitive. They use an N for intuitive because the I has already been used for introversion. As I go through this, I tend to use the full word to make it a little bit clearer. But when I've been doing the Myers-Briggs test for 20, maybe 25 years now, so you get used to dealing with the initials after a while, and they make more sense. So if you take those four dichotomies with a choice each, you get 16 personality types. It doesn't explain everything about the human personality. We're more complicated than 16. But it does help. It gives us some categories to think about ourselves and to think about how we interact with other people that might be different. Sometimes they define each of these four dichotomies as a temperament. And I've got a couple of these in here. The introvert, extroverted, they call attitude, information gathering, intuition, sensing, then thinking, feeling, decision making. I mostly agree with that, and then judging, perceiving is structure or orientation. I also think that judging, perceiving, there's a decision-making part of that as well. And I want to point out that judging here does not mean judgmentalism. Judging has to do with things like making decisions. I think that word misleads people sometimes. It's not being judgmental. It's judging like being a judger at a contest and making a decision about somebody. And it also has to do with how you structure information and organize it. I'm just going to skip over this quickly again. more temperaments. This is just ways of thinking about it. Extroversion, introversion is energy. Sensing, intuition is information. Thinking, feeling, decision. Judging, perceiving as lifestyle. You can go on the research guide and look at this and analyze it. Frequency of personality types, I've looked at a lot of these. They always vary a little bit because they're pulling different groups of people. So these are not absolutes. But if you want to take the test and then look and see kind of where you fall in terms of frequency, your personality type. And here's frequency of personality type ranked by frequency. ISFJ, introverted, sensing, feeling, judger. According to this particular study, came out as the most frequent. Here's something that might be interesting though. Type preferences of lawyers. And then you can see that, again, this is something you can go online and look at and think about. Thinking, 78%, feeling, 22%. And then judging, 63%, perceiving, 37%. That was based on one study. So different groups would score a little bit differently. Those temperaments predispose us to certain ways of thinking and understanding and conceptualizing. And it's not that we can't do the other, but it's a little more effort. I mean, if you're an introvert, it's a little harder to be extroverted, but you know, I'm an introvert, but I can still project when I need to. So here are some breakdown on these four dichotomies, and this is very brief, but just to give you kind of an idea of which they're talking about. You know, extroverts are more interested in the external world, people and things out there, and they derive meaning from connections to the external environment. They maximize interactions. They tend to think out loud. Introverts are more interested in the internal world of ideas and concepts, abstractions. They enjoy solitude more so. Sometimes they prefer to withdraw from external activities. And I want to comment on these pictures here. I do like the one of the goldfish jumping out of the tank. That's the introverted goldfish that wants to get into the tank and be alone. I think that is fairly apropos, and it's a nice little image. The other ones I don't like so much. It's very hard to find images for introversion, because just being alone doesn't mean you're an introvert necessarily. And these things of having people in a bubble who are introverts are just not true. Introverts, and that's why I decided to put it in there to go ahead and say something against that. Introverts are not necessarily isolated. They tend to be more internal, and they have lots going on in their heads a lot of times. And they can participate in external activities, but they tend to find them draining. That's why they need to get off to recover afterwards. But they don't live in bubbles, as they're kind of implying here. Sensing, a tendency to focus on observable facts. You know, sensors tend to take information in through their senses. That is, they want verifiable physical evidence or data to look at, and then they interpret from that data. Whereas intuitives are more interested in theory. They see abstractions more, they tend to see abstractions more. Relationships, possibilities, they value inspiration. You know, having that light bulb go off in their head, and the aha moment. And there's a quote by Leonardo da Vinci. It is by logic we prove, but by intuition we discover. Leonardo da Vinci. Thinkers make decisions impersonally. They tend to be logical in assessing. They evaluate ideas objectively. They value inferences that are drawn from, you know, real events and circumstances. You know, I've tried to get some images. I try to use images that reflect the concepts that I'm talking about. So, you know, here I have Einstein, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Marie Curie, you know, all people who were, you know, obviously were or are very smart couple people working on complex organic chemistry, and my favorite, Mr. Spock. But how many people know who Mr. Spock is? Oh, that's pretty good. You know, I thought it might be a little lower than that, but Mr. Spock was, you know, the kind of quintessential rationalist, always looking for data and making decisions based on data. Was not very intuitive, although occasionally he got beyond that. You know, feeling, you know, they emphasize the effect of decisions will have on people. Again, the pictures here are halfway apropos. There's Johnny Depp crying and Jack Nicholson being very happy. But this is actually from the movie The Shining. He wasn't so happy, he's just crazy in that movie, if you've seen that movie. But in any case, it's more than just being emotional. It has to do with being interested in interpersonal relations. They look at the human side of issues. How will these decisions affect people around me? And they do try to avoid conflict. Judgers, again, not judgmentalism, but judgers prefer a structured, scheduled, controlled environment. They want to be organized and deliberate. They're very scheduled. They develop fixed ideas as how things should be done, and they push strongly for disclosure. That's the decision-making capacity of judgers. Perceivers, again, the flip side of that, tend to be more spontaneous. Tend to prefer flexibility. They tend to want to continue to collect information rather than make a decision. And they have a wait-and-see attitude, spontaneous lifestyle. You know, sometimes you can have conflicts between, you know, when people work together with different temperaments. Judgers want to push to make a decision quickly. Sometimes they'll do that, and sometimes it works out fine. But sometimes they might make a decision too quickly without having all the facts or without considering how those decisions are going to affect others. Others will be maybe hurt or offended. Perceivers are always looking for information, putting off making a decision so they don't make those mistakes, but sometimes perceivers don't actually get around to making the decision. So you have tendencies, you know, maybe sometimes to rush to a decision or not make a decision. And, you know, we can all work to kind of balance our own personality. It's also good in an institution to get people that are different, because then they balance out each other, you know, each other's tendencies. We all have some tendencies that could maybe be better than they are. I'm certainly working on things all the time. Extrovert, introvert. Here, I'm going to go over this quickly. Here are some of the different ways in which we, you know, that we tend to see others who are maybe the opposite temperament than we are. Not always like this, but it can be. As extroverts can see introverts as secretive, unfriendly, aloof, self-absorbed, slow. Whereas introverts can see extroverts as superficial, too talkative, loose cannons, overwhelming, pushy, and rude. They might not be pushy and rude. It's just that they're very outgoing. Maybe they are pushy and rude, but it's sometimes hard to interpret. You know, introverts, extroverts tend to see introverts as being secretive. You know, are they really secretive? If you're an extrovert who's always revealing, it might seem like it. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. It's one of those things that we sometimes have trouble interpreting the behavior of somebody who's on the flip side of our own temperament. Sensors can regard intuitives as unrealistic, space cadets, new age, careless about details. Intuitives can view sensors as resisting new ideas, boring, unimaginative, old school. It's interesting because, I mean, the source that I use for most of this, I have more than one source, but the main one, which I document in here, a footnote, says that the sensing intuitive dichotomy is the most important for negotiation. And it's interesting too that a lot of times the sensors and the intuitives don't get along real well because of this perception sometimes. You know, that intuitives will look at sensors and see them as bean counters. You know, all they're doing is collecting data, you know, whereas sensors will look at the intuitives and say, geez, they're lazy. They don't even look at the data. The irony of this, though, is that when you get a team of an intuitive and a sensor, it can be a very effective team. Because the intuitive is very good at seeing the big picture, sometimes very good at coming up with abstract solutions to a problem that the sensor misses. But intuitives are not very good at the details. They miss details sometimes, and the other side can take advantage of that if they recognize that the opposition hasn't really mastered the details of the case. So the sensor can pick up on those things and manage that. So they tend to work together very well, or very effectively. Thinkers, feelers. Thinkers may see feelers as illogical, too emotional, trying too hard to please. Feelers may see thinkers as insensitive or distant, self-involved. Judges may perceive perceivers as wishy-washy, procrastinators, unproductive, unreliable, not serious, whereas perceivers see judges as rigid, controlling, black and white, stubborn. These aren't necessarily accurate interpretations, but they're ways that we can misconstrue sometimes the other. There's the article, and you have access to this online through your databases. It's about 150 pages long. It was a study done down at the University of Florida some time ago, but they actually broke students up into groups by temperament, and they hired actors to play the part of a client with certain things that they were supposed to say, and they observed how the different personality types work with each other and work with the client, and then analyze where they had problems based on their temperament. So why do we look at this? Why is it interesting? Negotiation strategies require many people to be adept with a lot of different things. They require behaviors that may or may not be drawn to naturally. In analyzing your own negotiation skill, what specific behaviors do you use and fail to use? And that's really the key here. Sometimes it can be beneficial to know what temperament your opposition is, but you're not going to know all the time. You need to know what temperament you have so you know where you're likely to make a mistake. And that's the most important thing. If you're intuitive, you might recognize, I'm very intuitive, but I don't always get all the details. If you're an introvert, you might say, I don't always speak extemporaneously well. I need to really practice that part. If you're an extrovert, you can think, sometimes I talk too much and I don't listen. So I really need to practice on listening to people. So you're trying to, the skill set that goes with your strong side on the temperament kind of comes naturally, and we want to develop that and neglect the skill set on our weak side. And it's the skill set that goes with our weak side that we need to practice to get better on, to become a better negotiator. One other thing I want to introduce real quickly, because it applies to how Myers-Briggs plays out in the workplace and in negotiation, is a notion of adversarial approach or a problem-solving approach. An adversarial approach is gain maximizing. A problem-solving approach is fair deal-making. The problem solver wants to find out how to find a solution for the case that tries to make everybody happy. Sometimes it works out either way, but an adversarial strategy proceeds in a linear fashion. Sometimes they attempt to deceive, threaten to get their way in the negotiation. Problem-solving strategies are, have a commitment to finding fair solutions. They're flexible, they're nonlinear. They try to first identify underlying needs. Sensing intuitive. Again, this is what exerts the most influence on negotiation. They tend to value concrete, detailed, factual information. Sensors tend to prefer an adversarial approach because it unfolds in a structured way that they can bring specific details to bear on it. So they do try to bring they do ask a lot of questions. This is a picture of Scully and Mulder here from, what's the name of that show?
X-Files.
X-Files, yes, thank you. The truth is out there. They also said trust no one, but I didn't like that, so I changed it to question. How many people know who Scully and Mulder are? No, that's pretty good too. I mean, my cultural references are getting so outdated. It's like I can hardly come up with things anymore that people were even born by the time it was out. So I'm trying. While sensors may avoid problem solving, they also use it in an adversarial strategy effectively. And they're good at articulating those positions because they have such good grasp of details generally. Sensors feel uncomfortable with a problem-solving approach. They're more comfortable with an immediate, concrete, and practical solution. I'm going to go over some of these quickly because we got 10 minutes to go. Sensors deal with facts and details of situations, but they don't always catch the meaning and possibilities that can be gleaned from them. And sometimes deadlock occurs if they can't reach a compromise. Sensors are less effective at articulating problem-solving strategies. Problem-solving strategies focus on general concerns rather than specific details. Problem-solving proposals get to specifics more slowly while parties elaborate their needs. Sensors tend to get frustrated with that method. Intuitives can use, problem-solving strategy used by intuitives are much less structured, focus on identifying needs. I'm going to skip that one there. And proposed solutions and problem-solving strategies should initially emphasize general concerns. Emphasis on general concerns rather than specific details. Thinking, feeling, thinkers emphasize logical, impersonal aspects of negotiation, impersonal form of assertiveness. They compete for maximum gain. They cooperate based on legitimate interest of others. It is more difficult for thinkers. Thinkers tend to not focus on the needs of the other. Thinkers tend to respond to attacking comments with strongly phrased counterattacks. This tends to intensify conflict and may lead to an impasse. Feelers are naturally attracted to problem-solving strategies. Feelers prefer harmony and agreement. Feelers tend to be better listeners. They don't favor a winner take all. Yeah, there's the internet hug. There's the feeler. Feelers are more concerned about their relationship with other negotiators. But feelers tend to give in to impersonally assertive competitive behaviors. This is another one of those recognizing your weaknesses kind of things that they sometimes even tend to neglect one's own concerns to satisfy another's needs. They may make undue concessions to make the other side happy. And you're there for your client, not for the other client. So this can be a problem for feelers when they're dealing in a negotiation. If they stay in a problem-solving mode, they do well, but if it moves into more assertive behaviors, they tend to want to withdraw. Feelers are good at active listening. This can facilitate cooperation. You know, listening carefully to somebody, especially if they're very emotional, is a way to diffuse that emotion. And feelers are good at that. They can reflect and sometimes calm things down and make progress that way. Judging, perceiving can be seen as closure, spontaneity, contrast. Judges want to make decisions, get things done. Judges do favor an adversarial strategy. They prepare extensively. They want to stick to a plan. They want to stay sometimes rigidly on that plan. They become frustrated easily sometimes, and sometimes, according to this data I had, they tend to want to move into a threatening position, and sometimes that can have, it can not work out well for that negotiation. Perceivers more comfortable with problem solving. They avoid commitment while advancing proposals. They remain uncommitted, helps to ensure that the proposals and solution intersect with the needs of all parties. I'm almost done. If I go a couple minutes over, if you need to leave right at 1 because you got to get to a class, that's fine. If you can stay a couple minutes, that's great. Perceivers tend to be more adept at generating alternative ways of completing a task. I've got the one arrow here going a different direction to kind of emphasize that ability to be more flexible. Their adeptness correlates well with problem-solving approach. Perceivers always want to learn more, but however they have to be careful about not revealing too much. This is another problem. It's a problem for extroverts and it's a problem for perceivers in negotiation, that they can sometimes give away information that they shouldn't. Okay, their tendency to be spontaneous or acceptance of ad hoc approaches sometimes leads to acting without careful consideration. Perceivers prefer to act spontaneously, have greater difficulty planning or preparing for the future event. Extrovert introverts enjoy verbal interactions. Extroverts do. They enjoy working with their teammates. They're comfortable with stating their case in an adversarial way. They're also comfortable in stating clients' needs and a problem-solving strategy. Of all the temperaments, extrovert is the only one that's really comfortable with both approaches. An adversarial approach or a problem-solving approach. Whichever way it goes, they're comfortable going that way, and that's kind of a real advantage for extroverts to have that kind of flexibility. Here I got a picture of Catherine here. I'm not exactly sure why I went in there, but I thought, well, he's kind of an example of somebody who's comfortable with an adversarial approach, maybe. And I wanted to get one movie reference that at least came from something that happened after you all were born. So I got that movie that movie in there. Extroverts can err in rushing out and offer. I like this little quote down here of the person saying, "Hey, I'm sure you're a really nice person, and I really like you, but could you take a deep breath and just stop talking for a minute?" Has anybody had that kind of experience in their life with somebody? Yeah. Extroverts may be inclined to overshare, but in a problem-solving strategy of brainstorming, that's an advantage because they tend to want to think out loud. They want feedback from others. And introverts tend to be non-talkative, but they are better listeners. They don't have a problem with disclosing information, over-disclosing, because they don't say much. So selectively disclose information. They're very careful about what they say. They sometimes clash in style. I got the teapot boiling over here. Extroverts become frustrated with introverts' slower responses. Introverts get frustrated with the quantity of questions from an extroverted opponent. Extroverts interrupt more. Extroverts feel stonewalled by the introverts who don't say much. Now the lesson here, one of the lessons, as I mentioned, the whole point of this isn't so much to know what the other person's temperaments are, it's to learn your temperament. And they point out here, it's just knowing your temperament isn't enough to overcome it. If you know you're an introvert, that doesn't make you a good extemporaneous speaker. If you know you're an introvert, you don't automatically develop ability to really get into the data of something. So if you're an extrovert, all these things take an effort to learn the skill set that goes with your weaker side. It takes practice. And I have some comments there that I've got in the PowerPoint that I won't go over, but they're online. You can look at it. I have some statements from students and how they realized their weakness. That students that did this study down at Florida, University of Florida, you know, how extroverts learned that they were talking too much and not listening, and said, I really had to tell myself, stop talking and listen. So they had to practice listening. Extroverts, introverts said they had to prepare what they planned to say ahead of time, so they had everything, hopefully, that would come up. They had something ready to say about it, rather than doing it, you know, off the top of their head. So you learn ways to compensate or remediate your weaknesses, but you go in better prepared as a result of that. These are some of those statements, which I'll let you look at them online. Here's one though. Student comment, because I'm a judger, it is without fail that I have an intense urge that I come to closure during negotiations. There, you know, he was recognizing that he was rushing to a decision rather than taking time to work through it. Here's an intuitive, I'm guessing, yeah. My inattention to detail affected my negotiations the most. Knowing the weakness, I can work to overcome it by writing everything down or by having a partner focus on details while I focus on the main ideas. And there's a few others that I'm going to skip over. They are online. There's the article, the main article. I looked at other things. But you can download that. It's available through your data. How do you like that page change right there? Follow us on social media. All our social media is FSU Law RC, or FSU LAWRC, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. We have all the social media covered. Katie Crandall does that, and she's great at it. Here's another one. Look at the Zoom. Next week, get zoned and local laws. That's a week from today. Katie Miller is doing that, municipal laws, and come to that one. Here is the research guide. This is online. It's got 3 tabs, a basic introduction. The second tab is just some description of personality types. And the third tab, which I think I have a slide for, is articles. And I have both popular and academic articles on Myers-Briggs and law. And I've actually added, since I took this shot, I have another tab, a great series of articles from the ABA that was 2016, so they've just been published a few months ago. I just found them. I added them yesterday. I also put this presentation on this page right at the top, so you can get this presentation if you want to look over it. There it is, web and mobile access. There's the URL to get to the research guide. I call them LibGuides, which is really the brand name, but nobody knows what LibGuides means, so I have to stop myself and say research guides. We have a research guide on it. All of our research guides are set up for mobile access. Responsive, they refer to them as. They shrink everything down and put them in one column. And I gave you a handout with that on it, so you have the URL for the LibGuide, research guide. And if you have a QR code reader on your phone, and you put your phone over that square thing right there, it will take you to the research guide. How many people have a QR code reader on their phone? 1 person, 2, 3, 4. Okay. That's all. That's the last slide. And I'm like 2 minutes over, so that's not too bad, right? Okay. Make sure you sign up. If you haven't signed a sign-up sheet, please. And you can grab one on your way out.
That was more extroverted. Definitely like extroverted, but like the other ones were a little harder. Yeah. Tuition of practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.